Welcome, everyone, to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I have a very special guest in store for you today, Dr. Scott Sherr, who I met years ago. I learned all about what he teaches in terms of health optimization. And on today's episode, we're going to dive into GABA, all the different ways we can approach increasing GABA in the body so that we're in our parasympathetic nervous system, in our rest and digest, which is hard for many of us to stay in because of other things we're reaching for. We also talked about sleep optimization. We talked about mitochondria and how we can have more energy and support our mitochondrial health overall over time. And we also talked about how to get to health optimization as opposed to just dealing with Band-Aids and solutions that we put on top of problems, but really building cellular health from the ground up. So I can't wait for you to listen to this episode today and enjoy. Good morning and welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Shivani Gupta, and this is the podcast dedicating to recalibrating your health every day. My goal is to help you wake up each day energized by addressing root causes and giving you new approaches to preventive health. The more we know about integrative health, the more empowered we are in building the vibrant health we want. Welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I have a special guest in store for you. If you have not heard about him, his name is Dr. Scott Sherr. He's an integrative hyperbaric medicine and health optimization specialist. He's an MD internal medicine who's very passionate about hyperbaric oxygen and a number of other different ingredients and different tools that he uses within his practice and within the rest of the work that he does. He's also the COO of Troscriptions, a smarter, not harder company. And his clinical telepractice includes HOME, H-O-M-E, as its foundation alongside an integrative approach to health. So welcome, Dr. Scott, to the podcast.
Hi, Shivani. It's nice to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So a little backstory, guys. I was at A4M 2023. That's the year I spoke at A4M Vegas, which I am so proud of. Life event. You've probably heard me talk about it 2 million times because I'm really proud of that. And I was walking the halls and I met a lovely woman named Yulia who said, "You have to meet my friends." And I said, "Okay, sure." I mean, we're in A4M, like the biggest conference on functional medicine. There's like a million different booths.
Big conference,
so
lots of people. Yep.
She brings me over to your booth and I'm like, what is this? It's like a tribe. It's like a group, almost like your own ecosystem within the conference. But everyone was so like bright-eyed and happy and collegiate and friendly. And I thought, wow, I want to be one of these people. Like, what is this? And then you introduced me to Troscriptions and I was like, you want me to put what blue thing in the side of my mouth and it's going to do what exactly? And then as we talked and hung out during the conference, because I kept coming by with Yulia as we were going around, I thought, okay, I'll try it. I had a speaking engagement at 3 p.m. What a great time to be energized for a talk. So I put I actually swallowed it because I was like, I don't want to go on stage with a blue mouth.
Understandably. And people do.
I felt great. Yeah. I felt focused. I felt clear. I thought, oh, this is interesting. And then I know on top of that, you have an entire platform where you teach MDs and DOs and practitioners how to approach health in their clinical practice using a lot of different functional medicine tools. So I know there's a lot for us to talk about because that conference you spoke on Methylene Blue. Last year I saw you spoke on GABA.
Indeed.
And I'm into all these things. I'm into all things health. And so yes, will you kick us off with what led you to teaching and practicing health the way you do now? Why you have such a love of hyperbaric oxygen chambers, which I know about, but I've never done one yet in this life.
Sure.
And what led you to this point? And then
possibly
we're going to dive
in previous lives.
Yeah, maybe in previous lives. Always possible.
Everything, everywhere, all at once is what I say. I mean, that's kind of how my life, I would kind of sum it up in the sense that full circle is that I grew up the son of a chiropractor. Very alternatively, I learned about a lot of different modalities, a lot of different ways of approaching health in that capacity. And then went to medical school and I did my internal medicine training. I specialized in hyperbaric medicine because I found it was a really cool way to kind of bridge some of the gaps between those two worlds, the alternative integrative world that I grew up in and the conventional world, because there was indications for both on both sides of using hyperbaric therapy. But I always kind of knew that I was looking for more of an integrative approach. And so over the last decade, I created a clinical practice that really focuses on a really holistic way of thinking about health. And the foundation of that practice is something called health optimization medicine. And that's what you were referring to. We have a nonprofit organization that trains practitioners on how to optimize health rather than focusing on disease and disease markers. Even functional medicine focuses on root cause of illness, which is obviously better than just putting Band-Aids on like conventional medicine does. But more similar to things like Ayurveda really are looking at how you can really focus on foundational health. And we work on the biomarker side of things, diet, lifestyle, supplementation, behaviors, exposures, stress, all these kinds of things. And so it's a 7-module certification course. And so I trained in that by the founder, Dr. Ted Achacoso, who I think you also met at the booth that year. And now I have that as the foundation of my clinical practice. In addition to that, I still do a lot of hyperbaric medicine as well. And that's more focused on, it's focused both on individual patients that need help with protocols and then also clinics that are looking to integrate hyperbaric medicine into their clinical practice, whether they have other modalities or they have a therapeutic focus is most likely the case. But the thing is that most time when I talk to patients and I talk to clinics, I often say that 80 or 90% of what I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with hyperbaric medicine at all. It has to do with how you're going to integrate and how you're going to optimize. What are you going to do before, during, and after? And a lot of that relates to the framework health optimization medicine. And so that company, the nonprofit, was incorporated in 2017. And then in 2020, we launched our for-profit arm of it called Troscriptions. And the reason we did that is because we really wanted a way to help people as fast as we could to optimize their health as they were going through the path of optimizing their health in the sense of like, what do we need help with right now while we're optimizing our health? And it takes a long time. It takes a long time for us to feel better, especially if we've taken us 40 or 50 or 60 years and we want to feel better tomorrow. It's not like it's that easy to do to feel better tomorrow. There's a lot of roadblocks. There's a lot of challenges. And so we came up with a suite of products and formulas that really do address a lot of those foundational aspects of what we have challenges with, like energy, like sleep, stress, focus, immune system health. And those main categories are what I would call like our methylene blue containing products, and then our GABAergic focus products as well. And then we have our kind of special immunity product that's based on a very cool mushroom called the cordyceps mushroom.
Nice. There's so much to unpack there. So let's first talk about what you said where it comes to functional medicine. So I love all the systems of medicine. I love Western medicine. I'm married into a big Western medicine family here in South Florida. I love and respect them. I love Ayurvedic medicine, where we say, listen, between lifestyle and herbs and spices, we've got you. We've got our entire toolkit unto ourselves to bring the body back into balance. And then I also love the in-between with functional medicine. But it's interesting what you just said. I thought, I have been going to functional medicine for years, and I'm learning a lot about what's wrong with me. And then I'm constantly trying to fix it. But how often do I take a step back? In my case, I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, so that foundation's always there of lifestyle.
Sure.
But how often do I just say, look, I'm actually just trying to create metabolic health and overall health for vitality.
Right.
And for a minute, I'm going to take myself off of this report card that I'm always failing at. Because in functional medicine, I definitely feel like 90% of the time I'm failing. I know where my blood work says I'm wrong. I can win at the stool test. Now I could probably win at the hormone test based on all the work I did. But I'm just trying to win the A. And it's hard. Like you just said, it's hard. So we end up reaching into a lot of supplements, a lot of tools. And then many of us who are in this functional medicine, health, integrative space are like, I'm a little tired from doing all the damn work all the time. And so how do you approach through this program that you're talking about, which I know I'm signing up for this week because we met and talked about it. And I said, listen,
I'm excited to have you.
I love what I teach already, but I want a couple more tools in my toolkit around how to explain the science and the background. Where science meets Ayurveda, I want a little more depth. And so I'm signing up for the program that you teach. So will you share a little bit about your approach of it's health optimization? It's not root cause medicine, which is actually an interesting distinction.
It is. I mean, What we learn in medical school, for example, is we learn very quickly anatomy and physiology, and very quickly from there, we go into pathophysiology. So you never really learn how to keep the system healthy. And you don't really learn how to make somebody healthy again, not to try to get a trademark infringement here, but in the sense that we don't really think of how to focus on health and focus on optimization. Rather, we are looking at how people are sick, why they're sick. And this is definitely important. I definitely have a lot of practitioners and a lot of friends in the functional medicine space, and I really do appreciate their sort of root cause analysis, let's call it. But the challenge is sometimes you're missing the forest from the trees, because if you just focus on one thing, like say you have Epstein-Barr virus or something like that, and just treating Epstein-Barr, like you're not actually looking at why the system is not really working on a optimal way to optimize the immune system, so that's not really becoming an issue, or is an issue, right? So the way we think about things is that you have, conventional medicine, which is, your direct treatment for blood pressure, for diabetes. These are more like Band-Aids, like giving medications, giving interventions and things like that. Then you have your functional medicine layer, which is definitely a much more significant layer, because you're looking at the root causes of why you have blood pressure problems, why you have EBV, why you have cardiovascular disease. Like those are important. But even deeper than that is that, what about the cellular level? Let's get out of the organs specific level. Let's get to the cells themselves. How well your cells are working? How well can you make energy? How well do your cells detox from the energy that you make? How well are you optimizing the inputs of what are coming into your cells? And then the outputs as well, and detoxification, et cetera. And so if you take the organs out of it, like we call it, organology is how functional medicine is practiced. But we do something called holobiontology instead. Okay. Holobiontology. So the holobiont is a really cool concept. The idea is that as an individual, as all of us as individuals, we are an individual that has an ecosystem inside of us. We're not just an individual that lives in a population that lives in an ecosystem that's outside. No, we are a huge ecosystem of inputs coming in from our environment, of bacteria, fungus, and virus that live in us, all over us, and outnumber us as well as internal organelles in our cells, like mitochondria, that are former, bacteria that are what are called endosymbionts, that have these mechanisms at play that are helping us to make energy, detox, as I was alluding to before. So we change the perspective from organ specific to holobiont specific, and you measure your holobiont by using something called metabolomics. And metabolomics is the study of small molecules that are kind of the real-time assessment of what's happening with your cells, what's happening in your gut, what's happening with your neurotransmitters, with your hormones. You can measure all of these things. And then they're all networked together too, Shivani. So it's not like, you can just look at one little node and not just affect that node if you try to treat that node. You're affecting a lot of other things when you're doing that. And so in essence, what metabolomics is a network-wide way of looking at everything. And then what we do at Health Optimization Medicine is we take all those network-wide metabolites and we shift them all, not to increase your longevity per se, but to optimize your health span. And we do that by moving all those networks to when you're 21 to 30 years of age on average. Because most of you that are listening, if you're still 21 to 30, enjoy it. If you're not 21 to 30, as most of us are probably that are listening here, we remember how it felt to be 21 to 30. I was just talking to somebody before this call that's 24, and I was like, oh I remember being 24.
I remember that age. I could work out and boom, body changes.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now it's a year.
I know. So the home hope perspective, the health optimization medicine and practice perspective, we call it home hope for short, is shifting the idea from organs to cells, from pathology to what we call cellutagenesis, which is how do you keep the system healthy instead of looking at how things are disease focused, and then reversing from that concept of longevity to health span instead. So it's very novel and it's very foundational if you think about it, and it doesn't take the place of any of those other types of medicine. It doesn't take the place of Ayurveda. It doesn't take the place of anything. It's just a foundational approach that shifts the perspective. And that's what we're trying to do with our patients clinically. And that's what we're trying to teach doctors and practitioners like you, Shivani, to be able to bring to their patients and bring this, sort of gravitas to their practice and truly transform the health of their patients and clients.
I love that. It's interesting. I've studied Ayurveda for 20 years and I studied it in India. I studied it in the US. And my brain, because I'm American born, my brain was always trying to force an answer of how do I explain this to people? How do I compel them to understand how it works? I already know it works. I'm very clear that Ayurveda works. It's from India. It's 5,000 years old. Billions of people have done it over millennia. So that piece of it is trusted and true. But our modern scientific brain oftentimes wants to hear things in the right terminology, in the right way for it to click for us. And so when I contacted you, I said, look, I have studied so much and I'm always a student. I actually would go do a PhD again tomorrow if I could on ashwagandha and all the other super spices. I really do think each one has such a powerful role. As you know, I'm turmeric obsessed. And I love understanding more and more how I can further the science of this super herb that I love. So that's one of my motivations to study with you is once I understand this better, then I can push for even more clinical trials in the ways that will benefit humanity. And so that's the background is I'm always a student. So when we talk about cellular metabolism, cellular health, supporting ourselves from the ground up, last year or last to last year when I spoke at A4M, I did a lot of research on aging. And I was doing that because it's a longevity conference and I'm speaking on turmeric for longevity.
Sure.
And I was appalled at the science because the science said aging is just catastrophic for our health. And so when you talk about health span, instead of longevity, I think that's an important distinction to make. I'm not here to live till 90. 80 to 90 doesn't even look that good in my family from what I've seen. What I'm here for is how can I feel so good in my 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe later. Who's to know how long I get to live? But I have that vitality here and now. And so when it comes to some of these tools that you talk about, hyperbaric oxygen and these things, how do you look at the toolkit available to us nowadays in functional medicine, biohacking, and all these things? And where do you see their place in terms of cellular health? Or do you very much look at that as, let's do the foundation and all that comes on top?
You hit the nail on the head at the end there. It's like when we first started talking about this, so Dr. Ted started talking about this back in 2019, he used a couple of kind of cool words. First one would be biohacking. Of course, everybody knows biohacking, right? But now I've introduced you all to the term Holobiont, right? And then, so what he would describe is what we do at Health Optimization Medicine and Practice is Holobiont hacking, or Biont hacking for short. And the idea is that it's a framework for all the biohacking you could ever imagine, because really what you need to be able to do is be able to measure things over time and see what changes as you're doing various types of things. And not getting sort of the chicken before the egg, or like whatever it is, the rat out of the, whatever it is, like getting the horse out of the barn, all these kind of the things that all these biohackers want to do is like try the new supplement, try the new cool technology. I gave a talk in 2019 at the same time frame as Ted was talking about this. And I asked everybody in the audience, how many people in the audience are taking supplements? This is at a biohacking conference. So like 95% of people raise their hands. And I asked the next set question, which is how many people are taking supplements that they need because they've measured their requirements and are taking supplements that are directed to that. And about 20% of the people actually raise their hands. Wow. Now, if you ask that question 6 years later, you will get more people that are doing that, which is fantastic, right? But the key with measuring is measure what you need and what actually optimizes you on a day-to-day basis, and start there. Are you micronutrient deficient? Are you mineral deficient? Are you having issues with your gut? These are things that are more important than trying the new like low-level laser therapy face mask while you're in your hyperbaric chamber and things. That's cool, right? And I'm okay with that. But if you don't have the foundation in order, then that's when you get into trouble. And so it's kind of for me why I got in hyperbaric medicine. I was getting in trouble, not serious trouble, but people weren't doing as well as I thought they would do in the chamber. And it's because I realized that their energy metabolism, their ability to utilize all this extra oxygen, which is what we do in a chamber, we flood the system with more oxygen. If you can't utilize that oxygen effectively, it's just going to cause more stress. And so that's an issue. And so funny enough, I've been disinvited from hyperbaric conferences before because I was going to give a lecture that said, please don't put them in the chamber. So, wow. And this is my experience. And not to say I think hyperbaric therapy is really dangerous. I think it's very safe, but I also think that there's a time and a place, just like everything else. And so the way I think about my own practice is I start off with the health optimization medicine piece as much as I can. And then I start adding things on top of that, as you were kind of describing. And one of the first things that I add, depending on the situation, it will either be something with methylene blue in it, usually, or something on the GABAergic side, because most of us on the GABA side of things, GABA is so important for relaxation and stress reduction and what we call parasympathetic activation. And none of my patients, or none of us in general, can heal, can recover, can detox if we're not GABAergic, if we're not parasympathetic.
Sure. I mean, you took us right into the next question beautifully there. So I agree with you. Sometimes I will text my biohacking friends who I've had on the podcast. I'm like, hey, Nat, what do you think of me starting some peptides? And she's like, Shivani, what would you like them for? And I'm like, to feel great, to anti-age. And she's like, no, call me. I'm not ready for you to do that. Do what you're doing first. And I love that. I love when we check each other as colleagues and we're like, what are you asking for? And think for a moment why you're asking it. And I realized what I wanted was more energy. That's all I wanted. I always want more energy though, because I always want to do like 10 times what my body and brain can do. And I thought, okay, well, how else can I get there? The Ayurvedic way is align better to your circadian rhythm, honor your sleep, walk in nature, take your turmeric. Like I have my tools, honor gut. And so it was just interesting that she said that, because I thought, wow, how often do we all reach for the tool because we're excited and it looks good? When I go to A4M, have to tell myself, like, leave your credit card in your hotel room or you will buy the whole conference because you'll be sold on every cool idea. And so now moving into this idea of parasympathetic, I think we forget that one of our big issues with our health nowadays is we're in fight or flight. We're not in rest and digest. We're always occupied. We're always on the go. We're never relaxed. And I recently met one of my clients who said, yeah, I'm always in fight or flight. And I thought, oh my God, it's like, do you realize you're trashing your health? Like, you can't even do that. You will cause chronic metabolic disease. That means you're always inflamed. What are you talking about? And then I thought, gosh, I have to do a better job as a practitioner, teaching all the ways that I literally drop into parasympathetic all day long. I find breaks, even in this podcast. An easy way to do that is mute myself, take a few deep breaths when I'm listening to you, relax my body. Remember,
I'm doing the same.
I'm happily talking to someone who I really love from my world of health. There's nothing here to stress me out. We're just having a cool conversation, but sometimes we can get really tense about things. So will you explain to us GABA and its importance? Because that's not an ingredient that I'm a specialist in, but I'm always fascinated by the variety of toolkits we have to bring to a given client to find the one thing that works for them.
I think a cool way in this for your audience would be to ask you a question, Shivani.
Sure.
Do you know how many thoughts that you typically will have in a single day?
Oh my
God. Any
guesses? 10,000?
It's in the tens of thousands. It's 70,000 thoughts per day. That's on average. And if you're anxious or you're stressed, that number can go up to 120,000. And if you're depressed, it's the same thing, actually. If you're depressed, you ruminate or you think about the same thoughts over and over again, just like when you're anxious. And so what's modulating a lot of that input and output, your thought generation, is your GABA system. And if your GABA system's not working very well, you have a higher risk of anxiety, of stress, of insomnia and depression, tremors, high blood pressure, so many different things. Okay. The GABA system, gamma aminobutyric acid, is a neurotransmitter. It is your most important inhibitory neurotransmitter, which means it relaxes or is like the brakes of your brain. So you have a brake pedal on your car that slows you down. You have a brake in your brain, and that is your GABA system. Now, GABA is only made pretty much in the brain. There's some GABA that's made in the gut, in the GI system, but that GABA does not get into the brain. Okay. So the only GABA that we make really that gets into the brain is what's made in the brain. And GABA is made from what's called glutamate. Glutamate is our primary excitatory neurotransmitter. So glutamate is what gives you pep. It gives you energy. It gives you focus, just like norepinephrine and dopamine do too. But glutamate is actually the one that's most important. Between glutamate and GABA, that's about 80% of your brain's neurotransmission. So your other superstar neurotransmitters, your dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, only make up about 20% compared to the 80%. And so glutamate, excitatory, GABA inhibitory. And there's always a balance between the two. If you're over glutamated, that's not a word, I've just made it up. I've verbalized glutamate. You're going to have excitatory symptoms. If you have too much GABA, which is very unusual, but if you can get yourself drugged with too much GABA, like drinking too much alcohol, we can talk about that. Then you have an overabundance of this calming neurotransmitter. Okay, but most of us, there's a huge number of people now that are GABA deficient, meaning that they have too much glutamate compared to the GABA. That's because they're depleting GABA for any number of reasons. It could be because they can't convert glutamate to GABA very well. That requires vitamin B6 and magnesium. It could be because they're mineral deficient and they don't have enough copper and zinc. It could be because they have gut inflammation and they're just not making enough of the precursor, which is, so we need glutamine, which is an amino acid that gets converted into GABA in the brain. And then gets converted to glutamate in the brain. And then glutamate gets converted to GABA, as mentioned. So if you have a leaky gut, your small intestine requires glutamine to heal itself and to actually as the fuel. And so there's all these sort of micronutrient, mineral detoxification, inflammatory issues that can cause GABA deficiency. And stress does it too. Stress really depletes your GABA system. So if your cortisol is elevated, which is your stress hormone, you're going to deplete GABA over time too. So we are living stressed, anxious, depressed, and can't sleep because of GABA deficiency. And the key is to enhance the GABA system. And you did just now talk about some of the Ayurvedic ways of doing that, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
But Dr. Scott, I'm B6 deficient. I'm a vegetarian. I'm zinc deficient. I have in the past had leaky gut. So I take glutamine every day as a preventive.
Yeah.
And of course, as a woman, entrepreneur, and mother, I have high cortisol. So, wow. What you're saying is a lot of us, not that everyone's like me, but a lot of people who I know are going to have this issue. So what are the solutions? Because that's problematic.
Exactly. And so when we're working with patients and clients, right, the real focus has to be getting them more parasympathetic overall so that they can rest, they can digest, and they can heal and detoxify. And so working on sleep, working on stress, finding, those moments in the day. Exercise actually is interesting because exercise increases something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which actually increases GABA as well. And so you can exercise, you can meditate, you can do breath work, you can do anything that's going to relax you overall is going to increase your GABA tone over time. But sometimes what we need to do and think about is how can we enhance the GABA system using supplementation just to help people feel like what it actually is to feel parasympathetic. And it's actually, this has happened to me a number of occasions with patients, is that we get them parasympathetic and they get this reactive anxiety to it because they're not used to being calm. Right. And so what we've done at Troscriptions was create a very novel way of enhancing the GABA system. Yes. And we call it obligate pairing, or obli-pair for short. And what that means is that the GABA receptor itself has a place on the receptor where GABA binds. When GABA binds to the receptor, which is called a postsynaptic receptor, meaning there is a neuron presynaptically and there's a neuron postsynaptically. The neuron postsynaptically, when GABA binds the receptor, it prevents that postsynaptic neuron from firing. It has a channel in it, it opens and all that stuff, but it prevents that neuron from firing. So that's why it's the brakes of the brain. So GABA binds to where GABA has a receptor. The GABA has a receptor, and GABA binds to a very specific site on that receptor. But there's other sites on that GABA receptor where other things can bind and increase the affinity or potentially decrease the affinity for GABA to bind. A good example of this, and one that I don't recommend, is alcohol. Alcohol is what's called an allosteric modulator. It binds to the GABA receptor on a separate site where GABA would bind and increases the affinity massively for GABA to bind to the receptor. This is why we feel more relaxed when we drink alcohol.
Sure.
However, of course, alcohol comes with major issues. Alcohol binds very tightly to the receptor. It depletes your GABA very quickly because it binds so quickly, and then it releases very quickly. And so you wake up at 2:00 in the morning with a massive headache. You now have a massive amount of glutamate compared to GABA because you've decreased your GABA load your GABA amount. And that's why you wake up with headaches and you feel irritable when you have too much glutamate. It's the MSG syndrome. Like if you've gone to a Chinese restaurant and you have MSG, you get these headaches and you can't sleep because of the glutamate overabundance or glutamate toxicity, really. Mild toxicity, but toxicity in that respect. And
True.
so alcohol is one of these things that binds this separate site on the GABA receptor, increasing the GABA affinity for GABA to bind. There's other things as well. The prescribed medication would be your Xanax, your Valium, your benzodiazepines. But the problem with benzos, just like with alcohol, is that they bind so tightly that they increase your risk of tolerance to the drug over time. We know that you need to drink more to get the same effect over time. Dependence, withdrawal, and even death if you stop them too soon.
Wow.
So you have to be very careful about depleting GABA overall. Now, there are some supplements like kava, for example, that bind on these separate sites and increase GABA affinity, but they don't have as much of a risk for you to deplete GABA over time, but they can. So GABA is one of them. There's another, something like, it's called CBD, CBG, and CBN. Some of the non-psychoactive cannabinoids can also bind there. Something called hanakiol or hanokiol or magnolia bark also binds to these separate sites. Valerian binds to a separate site as well. So they all increase the amount of GABA that needs to be binding to its receptor. They increase the GABA affinity. But the problem with all of them over time is that they can deplete GABA. So what we did at Troscriptions was, we not only are going to give something that increases the affinity to bind for GABA to bind to its receptor, but at the same time, we're going to actually give you something that binds to where GABA would bind on the receptor itself, so you don't deplete GABA as well. And so in Trocom, for example, which is our product that has kava, CBD, and CBG, which all bind to those separate sites that increase GABA affinity, we also have something called nicotinyl GABA or vitamin B3. Now, the reason for this, Shivani, is that GABA itself, as a supplement, as a compound, does not get across the blood-brain barrier very easily.
Okay.
If you have an intact blood-brain barrier, it should not get across because it's too big of a molecule. Okay. If you take GABA supplements and they work for you, it could be because you have a leaky brain, just like you would have a leaky gut. So you have to be aware of that overall. And it's not, a death sentence. You can work on a leaky gut and you can optimize it. Leaky brains are very common after severe infection, severe trauma, severe stress. Like it can happen. And we've seen a lot of this post-COVID and things like that. And so what we did is we found this compound called vitamin B3 GABA or nicotinyl GABA. So it's a vitamin B3 attached to the GABA molecule. B3 does get across. It has a transporter. It can bring along GABA with it across the blood-brain barrier. So in the brain, you have B3 and you have GABA broken apart. They hydrolyze. And so you get the GABA that binds to where GABA would bind on the receptor. And you have vitamin B3, which is mildly activating. B3 turns into niacin and niacinamide and NAD. So you get this mild activation, but you don't feel tired. You don't feel stressed. You just feel like your mind is more quiet, that you've kind of dropped into just more relaxation, just taking that edge off. As we say, as I say, from the boardroom to the bedroom. The boardroom, if you're super stressed, you can't think. Little Trocom is going to take that edge off. In the bedroom, if you have performance anxiety as a male, you might be able to perform longer because erections are parasympathetic, and ejaculation is actually sympathetic. So staying more parasympathetic for longer is going to help in that capacity. So that's how we really formulated. And to sum up, is that we formulate by enhancing the GABA receptor by having something bind to a separate site, increasing the affinity for GABA to bind. But at the same time, we're finding something that binds directly to where GABA would bind, whether it be GABA or something else, so that you're really holistically supporting the GABA receptor. You're not depleting GABA over time. You're going to decrease any risk of tolerance, withdrawal, dependence, or anything like that as well.
So interesting. For my audience, that might have been a bit scientific. They might be like, oh my God, my brain is exploding. But let me re-encapsulate it for my brain to understand. What you're saying is we have this molecule and around it are all these receptors. And so the solution that you created has different molecules, GABA and these different things you mentioned, that'll bind to many of the receptors. So instead of alcohol or drugs or other things, it will bind to many of them. But it's going to give you B3 as the vehicle to take GABA itself and dock it in the exact correct place to increase GABA overall in the body.
So I think that maybe the corollary to that, just to kind of help simplify, would be this. There's a GABA receptor. It's complicated, but we can optimize the GABA receptor by having things bind to it in separate locations so that you don't have GABA depleted over time. And the problem with GABA depletion is everything we mentioned before. And a lot of the supplements out there, especially the drugs like alcohol and benzos, deplete GABA. So the way we really formulate is by using two compounds that support the GABA system, preventing you to having any GABA deficiency or GABA depletion as a result of that. And that's very novel. There's no other there's no other products on the market that do what we do. And our sleep formula has a similar kind of combination. It has 8 different ingredients. It's called Troche, but it has something called agarin. Agarin is a long-acting compound that's derived from a psychedelic mushroom called the fly agaric mushroom. And this is the Amanita mushroom. It's the one that's famous for Santa Claus mythology, Alice in Wonderland, Mario Brothers. It's a red capped with white dots.
Got it.
It's psychedelic because of another ingredient in there called ibotenic acid, which is neurotoxic. Agarin is not. It's very safe. It binds to where that GABA would bind on the GABA receptor. Okay. And then in addition, we have hanokiol or hanokiol from magnolia bark in Troche, and that binds to a separate site on that same GABA receptor, increasing the affinity for GABA to bind. So that combination is so essential to support the GABA system without depleting GABA. And then Troche also has CBN and CBD as well, which also help with the affinity for GABA or agarin to bind in this case. And so it's a way to really support the system, while you're doing the harder work of learning how to become more parasympathetic. But it gives you a taste of feeling that way. And then also understanding how to optimize vitamins, minerals, nutrients, cofactors so that your GABA system is optimized from that capacity. So you have good conversion, that you have good precursor amino acids, that your gut is also not leaking anymore, right? Those kinds of things.
So what's interesting to me is what you just said, which is if you can get them to feel that way, they'll know how to feel that way, which I think we underestimate that. So I can attribute that to like working out. Today I picked up the 40-pound weight for squats and for different things. And I thought, wow, next week it should be the 50 then. But I got acclimated because someone the other day was like, just pick up the weight. I'm sure you can. And I looked at her like, I can't pick up the 40. I normally pick up the 30. And once I picked it up, I was like, oh, I can do this. I have this ability. And so I wonder if a majority of our society right now, especially whenever like political climate stuff is driving everyone crazy, which is a moment we're having right now, like everyone's amped up. And I'm like, everyone, you can be amped up, but please recognize that you also have to calm down. Like you have to have calm energy. You have to release all this. You can't be tense all the time. I know we go through different seasons of our lives, but training yourself to be parasympathetic in the morning, in the midday, in the early evening, again in the evening and before bed is key. But oftentimes we can't get people there if we don't hand them the tool. And so I'm a big believer in, I'm going to teach you all of Ayurveda. I'm going to teach you how to live the lifestyle. But I know that what I'm asking for is a bit much. I'm asking you to do a lot of different lifestyle shifts. In the meantime, because you're inflamed and in pain, let me give you the turmeric and just get you out of the fire while we're doing all the lifestyle. So it sounds to me like you're giving a tool to show them how to feel the way they need to feel, to be calm, to have that high quality sleep, to have those things that they desire, but in a healthy way. So we're not creating a crutch. We're creating a real tool that supports them. And then they can go do all the lifestyle changes after.
Yeah, it's well said. I mean, in general, most of us want to be on all the time and have forgotten to turn off, how to turn off. And giving the capacity for them to do that with something like Trocom and Troche can be very, very helpful. And it's something they can use on demand if they're having issues with stress or sleep and things like that. But in the end, what we're trying to do is the harder work of giving people a longer, sustainable way of optimizing their health by learning how to manage their stress and sleep better and work on anxiety and optimize cellular function overall. And that's a big piece of it too, right? I mean, you have to have optimized cellular function over time, but you really can't do it if you're so sympathetic all the time. You can help with things like methylene blue, but that's going to even work better if you have more parasympathetic tone in general. But I'm a big proponent of giving people the experience of what it feels like to be parasympathetic, and then being able to have them be able to get back there. It's just like with meditation, for example.
Sure.
This is why people think with meditation and psychedelics, if you've done psychedelics, you kind of know where there is kind of deal. So like if you're now meditating after using psychedelics, then you know where there is kind of deal, right? It's the same deal with the presentation of health in general. And so if you can get people feeling a little bit better and a little bit of understanding what that place could be, where they could go, then that's when they start seeing the change and the motivation to start actually doing the more challenging and long-term sustainable work, which is better for your health, but it's harder, to start get started. Yeah.
I mean, one thing you said was BDNF is a precursor to GABA.
No, well, BDNF is something that enhances GABA in the system. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor has lots of different mechanisms of what it does in the brain, but it gets released when you exercise. It helps with neuroplasticity, it's neuroprotective, but it also increases the GABA system.
So turmeric increases BDNF, and then we know that adaptogens function a lot like what you're talking about. When I take ashwagandha, for example, or any of my adaptogenic teas and things that I create, it creates that calming effect. So how would you compare something that increases GABA to the effects and the pathways of adaptogens?
So ashwagandha is a great example, actually. Ashwagandha is working on the GABA receptor in actually a very holistic way. It's actually binding to where GABA would bind, and it also is binding to separate sites at the same time. So it's one of the few, and that's why it's such a fantastic herb, as you know. And so it's one of the ones that I often recommend to my patients as well. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the herb and what sort of entourage effects it might have, but many of them are working on the GABA system in some way. And the plants kind of have good intelligence in general, right? And how they work in our system. So oftentimes they're working on multiple different pathways in multiple different systems, working on endocannabinoid system, working on our GABA system, maybe our serotonergic system at the same time too, oftentimes. And so ashwagandha is one of my favorites for the kind of myriad effects, but especially how it's working as an adaptogen and on the GABA system itself overall.
Absolutely. So let's jump into methylene blue, because I took it, I tried it. They offered me at this amazing center here in Florida in Miami, like you can IV methylene blue. I was like, guys, I'm into biohacking and new things, but that sounds like a lot. I don't know yet. Let me research it first. I'm into trying new things, but I like to read up on it. So why are you guys so into methylene blue, and will you explain the benefits?
So I actually think of methylene blue a little bit like an adaptogen, interestingly enough, Shivani. And it's because at low doses, it's a fantastic mitochondrial optimizer, helping with the mitochondria to work better. Nice. And at higher doses, it can be more of an anti-infective, actually. And so it's been around over 150 years, almost at this point. It was developed in the 1870s as a textile dye, and then became the first drug registered with our FDA in 1897. Because it works fantastically at high doses for infections. And the specific infection they were looking at here was malaria. And it got the name magic bullet at the time because you could give very high doses of methylene blue to humans and it would kill pathogens, but it would not harm human cells. Nice. And so there's very few other compounds out there that kind of fit that definition. And that's why it got the name magic bullet. And so it has a very storied history as the only antimicrobial around for several decades until antimicrobials were developed in the 1950s, penicillin being the first one. Right. And then from there, it's had a number of different lives it was the first antipsychotics were derived from methylene blue because methylene blue also increases norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine in the brain. And so it gives you like a mood boost. It's been studied in depression and bipolar. It's coming back around now as something that integrative psychiatrists are using to wean their patients off of things like SSRIs and SNRIs. You have to be a little bit careful with that combination, though, and you should do it if you're on those drugs. You should do any weaning or any methylene blue use with the help of a provider. Sure. But what we now know is that there's a huge amount of literature that happened over the last 3 to 4 decades that methylene blue is a fantastic mitochondrial optimizer. And mitochondria really are where we make all of our energy. And unfortunately, many of us, 94% of the US population has some element of dysfunction in the mitochondria, from toxins in the environment, from infections, from medications, from insulin resistance is actually the biggest one that affects our mitochondria. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so only 6% of the US population is metabolically healthy, which is quite low overall. And so what methylene blue can do at these low doses is it can help reboot, regenerate, and compensate for mitochondrial dysfunction. It can do this by helping with energy production, which is what the mitochondria are supposed to do. And it can also help with detoxification. And because every time we make energy, we make what are called, in quotes, waste products of energy metabolism. That includes carbon dioxide, water, but it also includes these other things called reactive oxygen species, or ROS. And you need some of these as signaling molecules, but too many of them can cause inflammation, cause stress, can cause deterioration of tissues, cells, and things like that. And so methylene blue has this capacity to work directly as an antioxidant at the same time as it can work as an energy enhancer. And so there's very few compounds that can do both overall. And so as a result of that, people with chronic fatigue and inflammatory issues, autoimmune problems, brain fog, issues with detoxification, muscle-induced fatigue or fatigue with exercise. These are all mitochondrial issues most of the time. Even fertility, the most mitochondria per cell are actually in eggs and sperm because of how the energetic requirements of making a baby, right? And so as a result of that, you're seeing symptomatology related to mitochondrial dysfunction in the places where you have the most mitochondria per cell. And that's where we see the most benefit of using methylene blue. So brain fog, attention problems, concentration issues, musculoskeletal issues, detoxification issues, like all these things as a result of using methylene blue.
Nice. I mean, so much of what you described, turmeric does. So in my brain, I was like, well, turmeric does a lot of what he's saying. But there's nothing wrong with bringing a multifaceted approach to our focus on mitochondrial health.
Does turmeric help with energy production, or does it help more on the detoxification side?
It helps on detoxification. It helps with reactive oxidative species.
Yes, it does.
Gut microbiome. I haven't read about it for serotonin and dopamine, these things that you're talking about.
Right. So the difference with methylene blue is that it works as an energy enhancer at the same time. So not only is it making detoxification easier, it also is working at increasing the amount of energy that you can make, and it also is increasing some of those neurotransmitters at the same time. So your dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. And so people feel a mood boost when they take methylene blue as a result of that most of the time. And they also have increased endurance too, because it can act just like oxygen in your cells. So if you're doing lots of endurance training, aerobic training, you can keep your heart rate up faster. I have some of my patients that refuse to exercise without methylene blue because they can keep their heart rate up for longer as a result of having it on board. It also works if you have less oxygen around. So if you're on an airplane, or if you're coming to travel and see me in Colorado, where I live at 5,000 feet, you're not used to that. Your body's going to be like, what the hell? You're on an airplane and you're pressurized 8,000 feet. I'm used to being at sea level. This is uncool. Right. And so methylene blue can compensate for those low oxygen states. And so everybody that comes to Colorado that comes to visit, they get a pack of methylene blue on their arrival so that they're less hit by the altitude when they get here.
Got it. You just helped me with something special. I plan to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm going to take methylene blue with me because I live in Florida. I have zero altitude acclimation at all in me.
Yeah, you're definitely going to need to do some acclimatization beforehand. Yeah. But methylene blue can certainly help. We've had a couple of people work, I think, was it Kilimanjaro? I'm trying to remember which mountain it was. I think it was Kilimanjaro. I had somebody that gone up there with methylene blue. I had somebody go to McKinley or Denali, excuse me, in Alaska as well, using methylene blue, as well as our Tromium, actually. So
nice, very cool. I love that. I love meeting founders who are obsessed with how do we help people, how do we create new tools, and then I also love that you bring in this foundational teaching to practitioners on, hey, let's look at health even more deeply. Let's talk about a different level of testing we can do and a different level of optimization we can bring, and how you can synergistically bring that into your existing practice, which I'm so excited about. So is there anything we didn't touch on today that you want to share?
Well, I think the only other thing to talk about would be the troches themselves. So like we have a pretty cool delivery method or dosage form at Troscriptions called a troche, or Troche. And it is a dissolvable lozenge that goes between your upper cheek and gum. And it goes up here, and it's titratable. So they're scored. I have one over here I can show you briefly. If I can get out of the packet, that's always the fun part. Yeah. Oh, it's already broken up, the ones I found here. So they come as big squares. This is a half of a square right here. If you take a look at that, kind of like that's a half. So it's kind of has like a little line in the middle where you kind of break it up into quarters, halves, or full. And so the nice thing about the troches, you can actually make them smaller. So you can take it in a quarter, a half, or a full dose. It goes between your upper cheek and gum. The nice thing about that is it bypasses digestion in your stomach, intestines, and liver, which can degrade our ingredients and make them less bioavailable. And it also will make it so that it's faster to get into the system. So that's a great way. It's a great delivery. We love it. With our methylene blue containing products, methylene blue is a very strong blue pigment, as you were describing before, Shivani. And so many people don't want to use our blue products and in their mouth. That's okay. They can swallow them. We have something called Just Blue, which is our pure methylene blue product. And then we have something called blue carnitine, which is a combination of methylene blue with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. That's our focus, flow, productivity, verbal fluidity, get it done product for about 3 to 5 hours. It's kind of like some of those pharmaceutical stimulants out there, a very similar kind of feeling without come down or crash, and no issues with tolerance and withdrawal or anything like that. But anyway, so with the methylene blue, many people will swallow those because they don't want the blue mouth. And that's fine. The best way to do that is on an empty stomach, and then eating about 15 to 20 minutes later is a good combination for a lot of people. So troches are fantastic. They're very unusual. If you're having pill fatigue, it's a nice way to not have to do pills, and nice that you can titrate your dose. So you don't have to take one dose that's in a capsule, for example.
True. I love it. Thank you. That's so exciting. I love understanding and learning about new things. And I know my audience does too. My audience is always looking for better sleep, more energy, feeling better, prevention, all the different things that I'm into. So if you heard this episode today about Dr. Scott, feel free to comment in the YouTube video or on the podcast. You can now comment on podcasts as well and ask questions. So Dr. Scott, where can everyone find you?
Sure. So if you're looking for me, I can be found on Instagram at Dr. Scott Sherr, DrScottSherr. If you're interested in my clinical practice, you can go to home-sf.co, which is my not my hyperbaric practice. It's my health optimization medicine practice overall. Nice. And if you're interested in the nonprofit, if you're a practitioner, you're interested in training, you can go to homehope.org. You can join me and Shivani actually as health optimization practitioners and providers. I'm very excited for that, and I'm excited to have you join us. If you're interested in our products, you can go to Troscriptions.com, or you can find us at Troscriptions on all the socials.
Perfect. Amazing. Thank you for joining me for the podcast today. For those listening, I'm Dr. Shivani Gupta on Instagram and drshvanigupta.com online. And I loved sharing today's episode with you. Catch us next week. Leave a review. Share this episode with someone you love. That's how we get the word out there about all the different approaches to health that we can take each and every day. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.